Right, so buckle up, everybody, because today we're going deep on a topic that's, well, it's a little different. Yep. We're going to talk about history and religion and how they can kind of get mixed up together over time.
You got it.
You sent over this excerpt from Heathen Heritage by Dr. Khaled Waleed.
That's the one.
And I got to say, this is a pretty wild one.
Yeah, and it's a provocative book for sure.
Yeah.
But I think the main question that Dr. Waleed is getting at is, can deeply ingrained beliefs, like the kind of stuff that we get from history and religion, can that be manipulated over time?
Yeah, like, is that even...
He says yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And he's got some pretty fascinating examples to back it up.
Okay, so give us a little taste.
All right, so we're talking about things like lost languages, rewritten history, even a mention of Socrates gets thrown in there.
Socrates. Okay, we're going way
back.
All right, so to help us break this down a little bit, I brought in an expert.
It's great to be here.
Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
So tell me, what is like the core argument that Dr. Waleed's making in Heathen Heritage?
Okay, so essentially he's arguing that the history of Islam, specifically the parts about the Prophet Muhammad and the Qibla, he thinks those might have been intentionally altered by the Abbasid state, and he thinks they were influenced by the Sassanids, and as he puts it, the children of Israel. Yes. So you've got these different groups all kind of vying for power and influence.
This isn't just some like academic debate, right? Like, this is their faith.
This is people's lives we're talking about. This is their understanding of God. Yeah. So Dr. Waleed, he actually does a really good job of putting you in the shoes of a believer, and he's like, imagine you found out that everything you thought you knew about your faith was wrong.
That's got to be earth-shattering.
Earth-shattering. He even uses this analogy of like finding out your family tree is completely wrong. Yeah. Like, you're not even related to the people you thought you were.
Right.
It's that level of like identity crisis almost.
Yeah, because like you build your whole life on certain beliefs.
Absolutely.
And to have that kind of ripped away from you.
Got to be tough.
That's got to be rough.
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about Mecca and Jerusalem.
He does in the book.
That's a big part of it.
Okay, so we're gonna get into that a little bit more in the full episode.
Yeah, we'll dive deep on that.
But I'm curious about this like mind control aspect. Like, is that really...
It's not quite mind control.
Okay.
It's more subtle than that.
All right.
He doesn't use that term.
Okay. Yeah.
It's more like influencing beliefs over time.
So how does he explain? Like, how is that even possible?
He's got this really interesting part in the book where he
introduces this concept of a creature from the earth.
A creature from the earth.
Yeah, it's like a hypothetical conversation.
Right.
And this creature is explaining how beliefs can change over time.
So wait, are we talking like brainwashing here?
Not exactly. No. It's not like a snap your fingers and everybody believes something different kind of thing.
Okay, because that's what I was picturing.
No, it's more about long-term manipulation.
Oh. It's
about controlling the information people have access to.
Okay.
Things like education, the media, political systems.
So it's a slow burn.
It's a slow burn, yeah. It's about subtly shifting the narrative over generations.
And Dr. Waleed actually lays out like a timeline for this, right?
He does, yeah. He's got this chilling timeline where he talks about how quickly this can happen. He says, 1 generation, you see a change in values.
Okay.
2 to 3 generations later, identity starts to fade.
Wow.
And within 4 or 5 generations, it's almost like the original culture never even existed.
So basically, I shouldn't trust anything my great-great-grandparents told me.
Well, I mean, maybe take it with a grain of salt.
A grain of salt, okay?
Let's do your own research.
But this is where it gets really interesting, right? Yeah. Because Dr. Waleed doesn't just throw out these ideas. Oh. He actually gives...
He's got receipts.
He's got receipts. He gives real-world examples.
Historical examples.
Okay, so let's get into some of those.
Let's do it.
He talks about the forced assimilation of Native Americans in those horrific boarding schools.
Like the Carlisle Indian School.
Yeah, where they were literally stripped of their languages and their cultures.
It's a brutal example, but it really shows how control over education can be used to manipulate people's beliefs.
It's like they were trying to erase their entire identity.
That's exactly what they were trying to do.
And then there's China's Cultural Revolution.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about a systematic dismantling of an entire culture's traditions.
It's wild.
It's mind-blowing how they targeted things like...
Yeah. Confucianism and Buddhism. Destroyed artifacts, rewrote textbooks.
Yeah. They even persecuted people who held on to traditional beliefs.
It's like they were trying to control every aspect of how people thought.
Absolutely. And it just goes to show the lengths that people in power will go to control the narrative.
And it's not just ancient history either. He brings up
more recent
examples like...
Yeah, like the imposition of Christianity in the Spanish colonies.
Where they were suppressing indigenous religions.
Absolutely.
And then there's the Russification policies in the Russian Empire, where they were basically trying to force minority cultures to conform to this dominant Russian identity.
It's like this urge to control beliefs and erase cultural differences.
It's a recurring theme throughout history, isn't it?
It pops up again and again.
So what Dr. Waleed's saying is what allegedly happened in the Abbasid state wasn't some isolated incident. Exactly. He's saying it fits a pattern.
Like there's a playbook for this kind of cultural manipulation.
You think so, yeah.
Okay, so what are some of the signs? Like, what should we be looking for?
Well, he talks about the suppression of dissenting voices.
Okay.
Control of religious interpretation. The rewriting of historical narratives.
So it's about controlling the information people have access to.
Yeah, and shaping how they understand the past.
It's starting to feel like we're living in one of those manipulated histories right now.
That's a thought-provoking point.
All right, well, we're going to have to unpack that a little bit more in the full episode.
Definitely.
But for now, I think we've given our listeners a pretty good taste.
A good overview.
Of what we're going to be diving into.
Yeah, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
All right, so stay tuned for part 2, where we're going to get into some even juicier details.
We're going deeper.
From heathen heritage.
Can't wait. All right, so before we get back into like who might have been behind this historical shift and their motives, I think we got to address the big question.
You mean the fact that this whole conversation is basically turning our understanding of history upside down?
Pretty much, yeah.
It's kind of unsettling, if I'm being honest.
And I get it. It can be a lot to take in.
If history can be manipulated this effectively, how could we be sure of anything we've been taught?
That's a really valid concern, and I think a lot of people probably feel that way right now.
Yeah.
But instead of just getting overwhelmed by that uncertainty, I think Dr. Waleed's work, whether you agree with all of his conclusions or not, it really highlights the importance of being critical thinkers when it comes to history.
So you're saying instead of throwing up our hands and being like, well, I guess history is just a bunch of made-up stories.
Right.
It's more about saying, okay, if those stories are open to interpretation, then I need to be more careful about what I believe and why.
Exactly. It's about empowering ourselves to become more informed consumers of history.
Okay.
And I think a big part of that is diversifying our sources.
So not just relying on one textbook or one website.
Right. Instead of just accepting one narrative, especially one that's presented as like the absolute truth, we need to seek out multiple perspectives.
That makes sense. It's like getting a second opinion from a doctor.
Exactly.
You wouldn't just blindly accept the first diagnosis you hear.
Right. You'd want to gather as much information as possible before making a decision about your health.
Totally.
And it's the same with history. We need to look at the evidence from different angles, consider different interpretations, weigh the arguments, and then form our own conclusions.
So as we're like sifting through all these different sources, how do we know what to trust?
That's where critical thinking comes in.
Okay.
We need to ask ourselves some key questions about each source.
Like what?
Well, who wrote this? What was their agenda? What evidence are they presenting? Are there any potential biases we should be aware of?
Like being a detective.
Exactly.
We're looking for clues, examining the evidence, trying to piece together the most plausible explanation.
And just like a good detective, we need to be aware of our own biases.
Oh, for sure. We can't just assume we're like neutral observers.
Right. We all come to history with our own set of preconceived notions.
Yeah, we're in baggage.
Exactly. Shaped by our upbringing, our culture, our experiences.
All of that.
And those biases can influence how we interpret events, how we weigh evidence, even which sources we choose to trust.
So being aware of those preconceptions is key to being objective.
Absolutely. It's a huge step towards becoming more critical thinkers.
Okay, so we're diversifying our sources, evaluating them critically, checking our own biases. what else can we do to make sure we're not being manipulated by these narratives?
Another crucial aspect is understanding the historical context.
Okay.
Every event, every document, every piece of evidence,
Yeah.
it exists within a specific time and place. So we need to consider the social, political, and cultural landscape of that time to really understand its meaning.
Can you give us an example of how historical context can change our understanding of something?
Sure. Let's take the issue of slavery.
All right.
It's easy to look back from our modern perspective and judge historical figures really harshly for their involvement in slavery.
Right.
But to truly understand their actions, we need to consider the prevailing norms and beliefs of their time.
That's a really important point.
It's easy to fall into the trap of presentism.
Presentism.
Yeah, judging the past solely by the standards of today.
Oh, okay.
But that can lead to a very distorted understanding of what actually happened and why.
Right. It's not about condoning or excusing their behavior.
Exactly.
It's about understanding the complexities of that historical moment.
And remember, history is not static.
What do you mean?
Well, new evidence emerges, new interpretations are offered.
Right.
Our understanding of the past is constantly evolving.
So it's an ongoing process, a conversation that never really ends.
Precisely. And that's why it's so important to be open to those shifts in perspective.
Yeah.
To be willing to revise our understanding as new information comes to light.
So it's not about arriving at a definitive answer.
Right.
But rather engaging in this process of continual learning and exploration.
You got it. And I think that's where Dr. Waleed's work is so valuable.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with his conclusions or not, he's forcing us to confront these complexities and re-examine what we think we know.
He's pushing us to be more active participants in that conversation with the past.
Exactly.
And that's a good thing.
It is. It is.
All right. So let's get back to Dr. Waleed's specific claims about the motives behind this alleged manipulation of Islamic history.
Okay.
He suggests that the Sassanids, after their defeat by the Byzantines, had a strong reason to downplay the Prophet Muhammad's connection to Jerusalem.
Right.
Why is that?
Well, remember, Jerusalem was a really contested city at that time.
Yeah.
A symbol of power and prestige for both the Byzantines and the Sassanids.
Right.
So by diminishing the significance of Jerusalem in the Islamic narrative, the Sassanids could potentially undermine the Byzantine victory.
Interesting.
And kind of protect their own legacy.
So if Jerusalem is seen as central to Islam, it strengthens the Byzantine claim to the city.
Exactly.
And weakens the Sassanid legacy.
Right.
But hold on. Wouldn't downplaying Jerusalem also diminish the significance of the Byzantine victory?
That's a good point.
Like, did the Sassanids really care that much about what the Byzantines thought of them at that point?
It's possible they saw it as a way to maintain some level of symbolic power.
Okay.
Even in defeat.
Even in defeat.
Or maybe they thought that by minimizing the importance of Jerusalem, they could prevent it from becoming a rallying point for future conflicts.
So they were playing the long game.
Potentially.
Yeah, trying to shape the narrative in a way that would benefit them in the future.
Right.
Even if it meant downplaying their rival's victory in the present.
It's a fascinating example of how historical narratives can be used as tools of power and influence.
Totally.
But Dr. Waleed doesn't stop there.
Of course not.
He goes on to argue that the children of Israel...
Okay, before we dive into that, can we just clarify something?
Sure.
When Dr. Waleed uses the term children of Israel, who's he referring to?
He's talking about a specific group within the Jewish community of that time, not to all Jewish people throughout history.
Right. It's important to be precise here.
Absolutely.
And avoid making generalizations.
He's making a specific claim about a particular group.
Okay.
In a specific historical context.
Got it.
Not about an entire religion or people.
So back to their alleged motives.
Yeah.
Why would this group want to distance Islam from Jerusalem?
Well, Dr. Waleed argues that they saw it as a way to solidify their own claims to the city by minimizing any potential Islamic claims to Jerusalem. They could create more space for their own narratives to dominate.
Like they were trying to clear the playing field. To ensure that their own historical and religious claims to Jerusalem remained unchallenged.
And Dr. Waleed suggests that these different groups, each with their own agendas, contributed to this shift in the historical narrative surrounding Islam, a shift that emphasized Mecca over Jerusalem.
So we've got the Sassanids trying to protect their legacy, this specific group within the Jewish community of that time. Trying to strengthen their own claims to Jerusalem.
Right.
And in the middle of all this, the historical narrative about Islam is being reshaped.
It's a complex web of motivations and actions.
It's starting to feel like a conspiracy theory.
I can see why you'd say that.
But Dr. Waleed does present some interesting evidence to support his claims.
He does. And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to take a closer look at that evidence.
Awesome.
And explore some of the tools he suggests we can use to distinguish fact from fiction in historical accounts.
So we can become more discerning consumers of history. I'm ready to put on my detective hat and dig deeper.
Let's do it.
All right, so we spent the last two parts really digging into these claims that Dr. Waleed's making about how Islamic history might have been manipulated.
Yeah.
And I got to say, I'm kind of fascinated, but also a little freaked out.
I get it.
It's like...
It's a lot to process.
Yeah, it's one thing to think about history being rewritten.
Right.
But to think about it being done so deliberately.
And for very specific reasons.
Yeah, it's like a whole new level of...
Yeah, it challenges our assumptions.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like, how much of what we know is actually true.
That's the big question, isn't it?
But you know what? Instead of just spiraling into an existential crisis, maybe we can use Dr. Waleed's work as like a guide.
Okay, I like that.
To help us navigate these, like, murky waters of history.
Yeah, he does give us some tools.
Yeah, he does. He talks about specific ways we can start to kind of untangle these threads.
Yeah, one of the most important things he talks about is language.
Oh, interesting.
He says that understanding the original languages of religious texts.
So in this case, Arabic.
Right. He argues that it's absolutely crucial.
Why is that?
Well, he says that sometimes key terms get mistranslated or misinterpreted over time.
Okay.
And that can lead to a distortion of the original message.
So it's not just about what the words say.
Right. It's about the nuances of meaning.
He even gives that example of the Arabic word qibla.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Which is often translated as direction of prayer.
Right. But he says that the original meaning was much broader.
Okay.
It wasn't just about physical direction. It encompass this whole concept of orientation.
So it's like aligning your whole being with...
Yeah, your thoughts, actions, everything.
It's kind of like a philosophy almost.
Exactly. And he argues that understanding that subtle but important difference in meaning can change how we understand Islamic practices and beliefs.
It's not just about facing a certain direction when you pray.
Right.
It's about a much deeper alignment.
Exactly. It's about aligning yourself with a set of principles.
Wow, I never thought about it that way.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you start to think about it.
And it makes you wonder how many other words or phrases have been mistranslated or misinterpreted over time.
Oh, I'm sure there are countless examples.
And how those misinterpretations might have shaped our understanding of not just religion, but history in general.
It's a rabbit hole, for sure.
It's like a whole hidden layer of meaning that we've lost.
Yeah, and it's a reminder to be cautious about accepting interpretations at face value.
Especially when it comes to something as complex as religious texts.
Right. Dr. Waleed encourages us to go back to the source. Engage with the original languages. And really wrestle with those texts for ourselves.
It's like taking ownership of our own understanding.
Exactly. It's about reclaiming our agency.
Instead of just blindly accepting what we've been told.
Right. It's about thinking for ourselves and forming our own conclusions.
And that takes effort, right? Like, it's not always easy to question what we've been taught.
No, it can be uncomfortable.
Or to grapple with these different interpretations.
But it's so worthwhile.
Yeah, it is.
It's how we grow.
It's like we're taking back control of the narrative.
Absolutely.
Shaping our own understanding of history.
And religion.
Instead of just passively accepting what's been given to us.
It's powerful stuff.
So it's not just about language, right?
No, Dr. Waleed also talks about the importance of historical context.
Oh, right. We talked about that a little bit in the last part.
Yeah, he says that we can't truly understand these historical events or texts without considering the social, political, and cultural landscape in which they emerged.
Right. It's like trying to understand a movie without knowing anything about the director or the actors
or the time period it was made in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We need to step outside of our own time and try to see the world through the eyes of the people who lived in that era.
And that means acknowledging that their values and beliefs might have been very different from our own.
Right. We can't just impose our modern-day judgments on the past.
Exactly. We need to try to understand the context in which these events unfolded.
To really grasp their true meaning.
It's like putting together a giant puzzle.
Okay.
And those pieces of context are crucial to seeing the bigger picture.
But sometimes when we start putting those pieces together, we realize that the picture isn't what we thought it was.
That some of the pieces might be missing or even fake.
Which can be kind of unsettling.
It can be, but it can also be really exciting.
Exciting. How so?
Well, it opens up new possibilities.
Okay.
It allows us to question, to explore, to reimagine the past in new and interesting ways.
It's like we're not just stuck with one version of the story.
Exactly.
We can create our own understanding.
Based on the evidence and our own critical thinking.
So where does all of this leave us? I feel like we've been on this whirlwind tour of history and religion and language.
And critical thinking.
Yeah, it's been a lot to take in.
It has, but I think it's been really valuable.
I agree.
Heathen Heritage is a really thought-provoking book.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely raises more questions than it answers.
But that's okay, right? Like that's part of the process?
It's all part of the journey.
It's like Dr. Waleed has given us this map and compass.
And now it's up to us to explore.
To chart our own course.
He's provided the framework, the tool.
But ultimately, it's up to each of us to do the work.
To engage with the material, to think critically.
To come to our own conclusion.
Exactly.
So if you're listening to this and you're feeling intrigued.
Or even a little bit challenged.
Yeah, we encourage you to check out Heathen Heritage for yourselves.
Dive in, see what you think.
And remember, history is an ongoing conversation.
It's always evolving.
So share your insights, challenge your assumptions.
Let's keep learning together.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Heathen Heritage.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring.
And keep diving deep.
We'll see you soon.